They say success is the best revenge, but silence? Silence is deadly. Lucas Thornton thought he had buried his past along with the mediocre girl he dumped 5 years ago. He was the Wolf of Wall Street. She was just the quiet girl who couldn't afford a cab. He spent half a decade climbing to the top, only to realize the ladder was leaning against her wall. This isn't just a story about a breakup. It's about the moment the man who thought he ruled the world realized he was just an employee in hers. Listen closely, because you never know who is really signing your paycheck. The air inside the ballroom of the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue smelled of old money, a specific blend of expensive perfumes, aged mahogany, and the metallic tang of chilled Osetra caviar. For Lucas Thornton, this was the smell of victory. At 34, Lucas was the youngest senior vice president at Harrington & Moore, one of New York's most aggressive private equity firms. He adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of a champagne flute, satisfied with what he saw. He was sharp, handsome in a predatory way, and on the verge of closing the deal of the decade. "Stop looking at yourself, Luke. It's vain," a voice drawled beside him. Lucas turned to see Isabel Vanderbilt, his fiancée. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than most people's cars, her blonde hair coiffed into a severe architectural bun. Isabel was the daughter of a senator. She was the right kind of woman, the kind of woman who looked good on a campaign poster or a yacht in the Hamptons. "I'm not looking at myself," Lucas lied smoothly, taking a sip of his drink. "I'm scanning the room. The rumor is the mysterious majority shareholder of Obsidian Tech is here tonight. If I can get 5 minutes with them, the acquisition goes through, and I make partner." Isabel rolled her eyes, bored by the talk of business. "Just don't embarrass me. My father is watching." Lucas wandered away from her, his eyes darting across the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. He felt invincible. 5 years ago, he had been a struggling analyst dating a sweet, quiet girl named Vivian. She was a librarian of all things. She wore thrift store sweaters, cooked pasta at home because they couldn't afford dinner out, and was perfectly content with a small life. He remembered the night he dumped her. It was raining. He had just gotten his first big promotion and realized she didn't fit the picture anymore. "You're a sweet girl, Viv," he had told her, standing in their cramped apartment in Queens. "But let's be real. I'm going places. You're comfortable. I need someone who can keep up, someone who understands power." She hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown things. She had just looked at him with those large, sad hazel eyes, packed a single bag, and walked out into the rain. He hadn't seen or heard from her since. Good riddance, he had thought. Dead weight. Lucas shook the memory away. That was ancient history. He was a king now. He made his way toward the bar, signaling for a refill of his scotch. That's when he saw her. The glass nearly slipped from his hand. Standing near the service entrance, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement of white lilies, was a woman in a simple, floor-length black dress. It was unadorned, almost severe in its lack of jewelry. She had her back to him, but the curve of her neck, the way she held her shoulders, it was unmistakable. "Vivian," he whispered. It couldn't be. Vivian was probably still in Queens, stamping books and collecting coupons. What would she be doing at a $5,000 a plate gala hosted by the global banking elite? Curiosity, mixed with a cruel sort of nostalgia, pulled him toward her. He needed to see. He needed to confirm that he had made the right choice, that she looked tired, worn out of place. He approached her from behind. "Excuse me." The woman turned. Lucas felt the breath punch out of his lungs. It was her. The same hazel eyes, the same soft mouth, the same chestnut hair, though now it was pulled back in a sleek, modern style. But something was different. The Vivian he knew was timid. She hunched her shoulders to take up less space. This woman stood with the posture of a statue. "Lucas," she said. Her voice was cool, stripped of any emotion. Not angry, not happy, just factual. "My God," Lucas let out a short, incredulous laugh. "It is you. I almost didn't recognize you without the cardigan." He looked her up and down, his gaze arrogant. He noticed she wasn't holding a drink. She was standing near the staff door. "So," Lucas smirked, swirling his scotch. "Catering or event coordination. I know times are tough, but I didn't think you'd be working the night shift." Vivian looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm working, yes, in a manner of speaking." "Good for you," Lucas said, his tone dripping with condescension. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "Hey, look, I'm actually looking for the VIP lounge. The service here has been slow. If you can make sure my table 4, the Vanderbilt table, gets a fresh bottle of Dom Perignon immediately. This is yours." He held the money out to her. It was the ultimate power move, a reminder of where he was and where she was. Vivian looked at the money, then up at his eyes. For a second, a flicker of amusement danced in her gaze. She didn't take the bill. "I don't think that will be necessary, Lucas," she said softly. "Come on, Viv. Don't be proud. I know you," he pressed, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "You always needed help. I'm trying to be nice. Take the tip." Before she could answer, a heavy hand landed on Lucas's shoulder. It was Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Harrington & Moore, Lucas's boss. Arthur was a large man who sweated profusely when he was nervous, and right now he was sweating buckets. "Lucas, what are you doing?" Arthur hissed, his face pale. "Just giving some instructions to the staff, Arthur." "Relax," Lucas said, waving the $100 bill. "I'm ensuring we get the good champagne." Arthur looked at Lucas, then at Vivian, and his eyes widened in sheer horror. He looked as if he was about to have a stroke. He slapped Lucas's hand down, knocking the money to the floor. "You idiot," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. Lucas frowned, confused. "Arthur, what?" Arthur didn't answer him. Instead, the CEO turned to Vivian, bowed his head deeply, almost a curtsy, and spoke in a voice that Lucas had never heard him use. It was a voice of total, abject submission. "My deepest apologies for the interruption," Arthur stammered. "We are ready for you whenever you are." Lucas froze. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull buzz. He looked at his ex-girlfriend, the librarian, the girl who used to clip coupons. Vivian ignored Arthur and kept her eyes locked on Lucas. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a shark's smile. "I'll be there in a moment, Arthur," she said. "I was just catching up with an old acquaintance." Arthur grabbed Lucas by the arm, his grip bruising. "Come with me. Now." "But," Lucas stammered, looking back as he was dragged away. Vivian hadn't moved. She was watching him go, standing alone in her black dress, looking less like a waitress and more like a queen watching a jester leave the court. Lucas was shoved into the private conference room, adjacent to the ballroom. The room was soundproofed, cutting off the music and laughter from outside. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by men and women who controlled half the GDP of the Eastern Seaboard. There was David Solomon from the Investment Board, Sarah Jenkins from the Treasury Department, and the heads of 3 major international banks. Lucas straightened his jacket, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Arthur, what the hell is going on? Why were you bowing to Vivian? She's a librarian from Queens." Arthur turned on him, his face purple with rage. "Shut up, Thornton. Just shut up. If you want to keep your job, you will not speak unless spoken to. Do you understand?" Lucas blinked, stunned. He had never been spoken to like this. He was the star earner. "I don't understand. We're here to pitch the acquisition of Obsidian Tech. We're waiting for the chair of the board. Why are we wasting time?" "We are waiting," Arthur hissed, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "She's on her way in." The heavy oak doors at the end of the room clicked open. The room went silent. 12 of the most powerful people in New York stood up simultaneously. It was an instinctive reaction to power. Lucas remained seated for a split second, confused, before Arthur kicked his shin under the table. Lucas scrambled to his feet. Vivian walked in. She wasn't holding a tray of drinks. She was flanked by 2 men in dark suits, lawyers, Lucas realized with a jolt. High-priced corporate litigators. He recognized one of them, Harrison Ford, no relation to the actor, the most ruthless contract attorney in the city. Vivian walked to the head of the table, the seat that had been empty, the seat reserved for the chairman of Obsidian Tech and the primary investor of the Sterling Holloway Trust. She didn't sit immediately. She placed a thin leather folder on the table and looked around the room. When her eyes landed on Lucas, she didn't blink. "Please, sit," she said. The room sat. "My apologies for the delay," Vivian began, her voice projecting with a clarity and authority Lucas had never heard before. "I was detained by a service issue in the ballroom." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. Lucas felt vomit rising in his throat. Arthur cleared his throat. "Madam Chairwoman, again, we are incredibly honored that you granted us this meeting. We know the Sterling Holloway Trust is very selective with its partners." Sterling, Lucas thought. His mind raced. Vivian's last name was Sterling. But in Queens, she said her parents were dead. She said she had no family. Sterling, as in the Sterling Copper Empire, the family that owned half the railroads in the 1920s and then vanished into private equity. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Mr. Pendleton," Vivian said, opening the folder. "You are here because Harrington & Moore wants to acquire Obsidian Tech. You are offering a leveraged buyout." "Yes, Madam Chairwoman," Arthur said, sweating again. "And we have our lead strategist here, Lucas Thornton, to walk you through the numbers." Arthur gestured to Lucas. This was it. This was the moment Lucas had prepared for 6 months. This was his moment to shine. But his tongue felt like sandpaper. He looked at the woman he had dumped in the rain. Lucas started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. "Miss Sterling. It's Mrs. Sterling Vance," the lawyer, Harrison, corrected sharply. "Or Madam Chairwoman." Vivian raised a hand to silence her lawyer. "It's fine, Harrison. Mr. Thornton and I know each other." She leaned forward, resting her chin on her interlaced fingers. "Go ahead, Lucas. Pitch me. Tell me why I should sell my company to you." Lucas forced himself to switch into autopilot. He stood up, avoiding her eyes, and looked at the projection screen. "Right. Obsidian Tech has been underperforming in the Asian markets. We believe that with our management structure, we can trim the fat, reduce overhead by 15%, and increase profitability within Q3. "Trim the fat," Vivian repeated. "That usually means firing people, doesn't it?" "It means optimizing the workforce," Lucas corrected, using the corporate buzzword. "Efficiency is key. We noticed your R&D department is bloated. Too many passion projects, not enough revenue generators." "I see," Vivian said. She didn't look at the screen. She was looking at him. "And you, Lucas, are you efficient?" I like to think so." "You like to cut dead weight," she said. The double meaning hung in the air like a guillotine blade. You discard things that don't immediately serve your ambition. Is that a fair assessment? Lucas felt the color drain from his face. I make the hard decisions that others are afraid to make. That is business. Is it? Vivian opened a document in front of her. I've reviewed your proposal. It's aggressive. It's smart. It would probably make me $1 billion in the short term. Lucas exhaled. He had her. Greed always won. She might hate him, but she loved money. Everyone did. However, Vivian continued, her voice hardening, I don't need $1 billion. I have 10. She closed the folder with a snap. The Sterling Holloway Trust isn't just a shareholder, Mr. Thornton. We are the bank. We hold the debt for Harrington and Moore. The room went deadly silent. Arthur Pendleton looked like he was about to faint. What? Lucas whispered. Your firm, Vivian explained calmly, as if teaching a child, is over-leveraged. You borrowed heavily to finance your last 3 takeovers. You borrowed from a consortium of private lenders. Did you never check who the lead lender was? Lucas looked at Arthur. Arthur had handled the financing. We used a shell corporation, Arthur squeaked. Magpie Ventures. Magpie Ventures is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Holloway, Vivian said, which means I own your debt, and there is a clause in your loan agreement, Clause 4B, the call provision. She slid a piece of paper across the long table toward Lucas. If the lending institution, that's me, deems the management of the borrowing firm to be unstable or ethically compromised, we can call in the full amount of the loan immediately. She paused, letting the reality sink in. I am calling in the loan, Lucas. Tonight. $450 million, payable immediately. You can't do that, Lucas shouted, forgetting himself. That would bankrupt the firm. It would destroy us. Yes, Vivian said simply. It would. She stood up. The meeting was over. Unless, she added, pausing by the door, unless Harrington and Moore undergoes a restructuring of its own. I might be willing to extend the loan terms, but I would require the removal of the dead weight that is compromising the firm's ethical standing. She looked directly at Lucas. I want his resignation, Vivian said to Arthur, and I want him escorted out of the building. Tonight. Arthur didn't hesitate. He turned to Lucas, his eyes filled with panic and fury. Get out, Thornton! You're fired! Arthur, you can't be serious! She's doing this out of spite! Lucas screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Vivian. Vivian stopped. She turned back one last time. She didn't look angry. She looked at him with pity. Spite is for people who have nothing else, Lucas, she said softly. This isn't spite. It's just business. You were right 5 years ago. You needed someone who understood power. I understand it now. Do you? She turned and walked out the door, her lawyers trailing behind her, leaving Lucas standing in the ruins of his life, while the scent of expensive lilies and impending bankruptcy filled the room. The walk from the conference room to the hotel lobby was the longest 50 yards of Lucas Thornton's life. He wasn't just being escorted, he was being perp-walked. 2 hotel security guards, burly men in ill-fitting blazers, flanked him closely enough that their shoulders brushed his. They didn't drag him, but the implication of force was there. They were ensuring the contamination was removed from the building. As they passed through the edge of the ballroom, the party was still in full swing. Crystal glasses chimed, laughter floated in the air, and a jazz quartet played a bouncy tune that felt obscenely cheerful, given that Lucas's life had just ended. A few heads turned. People in this world sniffed blood in the water faster than sharks. They saw Arthur Pendleton rush back to the bar, pale and shaking. They saw Lucas flanked by security, his tie loosened, his face a mask of shock. The whispers started immediately. Then Isabel intercepted them near the coat check. She looked radiant, holding a fresh glass of champagne, oblivious to the execution that had just taken place upstairs. "There you are, darling," she said, her smile tight. "My father is furious. You left us sitting at table 4 for 45 minutes. Did you close the deal? Is it done?" Lucas stopped. The security guards stopped with him, impassive statues. He looked at Isabel, really looked at her. He saw the calculation in her blue eyes, the way her hand rested possessively on the lapel of his Tom Ford jacket, a jacket he wasn't sure he could afford to dry clean anymore. "It's done," Lucas said, his voice hollow. "Wonderful." She clapped her hands together lightly. "Father will be thrilled. Now come, we need to—" "No, Isabel," Lucas interrupted. The words tasted like ash. "The deal isn't done. I'm done." Her smile froze. It didn't disappear. It just stopped moving, like a glitching video. "What are you talking about?" "I was fired. Just now. By Arthur. At the request of the new owner of our debt." Isabel blinked rapidly. It took her brain a moment to process the concept of Lucas failing. It was outside her operating parameters. "Fired? Don't be ridiculous, Luke. You're the golden boy. You're making partner next month. We have the deposit down on the penthouse in Tribeca." "There is no partner. There is no penthouse," Lucas snapped, his control fracturing. "It's over. The firm is about to go under, and I am the sacrificial lamb." The transformation in Isabel was instantaneous. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by a cold, hard assessment. She took a half-step back, physically distancing herself from the failure. "How could you let this happen?" she hissed, glancing around to see if anyone of importance was watching this sordid little scene. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed my father." "I didn't let it happen, Isabel. It was done to me. By—" He couldn't bring himself to say Vivian's name to her. "By someone with a grudge." Isabel let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "A grudge? You just lost $100 million future because you upset someone? God, Lucas, I thought you were a killer. Turns out you're just prey." She reached up, not to comfort him, but to expertly unpin the diamond brooch from her dress, a gift he had bought her last month on credit, anticipating his bonus. She dropped it into his palm. It felt cold and heavy. "I think you should leave," she said. "Isabel, wait. We're supposed to get married in June. This is a setback, a temporary— Marriage is a merger, Lucas," she said coldly. "You just became a toxic asset. My father warned me you were too volatile, too new money." She turned her back on him without another word and walked back toward the ballroom, toward the light and the music and the people who still mattered. "Sir," one of the guards said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The exit is this way." Lucas walked out onto Fifth Avenue. It wasn't raining. That would have been too poetic. Instead, it was a bitterly cold, clear November night. The wind whipped through his thin suit jacket, biting at his skin. He reached into his pocket for his phone to call his company car, only to realize his company phone had been remotely bricked. It was a useless black rectangle. He stood on the sidewalk, a man who 5 years ago traded love for ambition, only to find that ambition was a fickle mistress who had just kicked him to the curb. 60 minutes later, Lucas was sitting on the white leather couch in his minimalist apartment in Hudson Yards, nursing 4 fingers of cheap whiskey he found in the back of a cabinet. The apartment, overlooking the Hudson River, was usually a source of immense pride. Tonight, the floor-to-ceiling windows felt exposed, and the echoing silence of the high ceilings mocked him. His personal cell phone, the one he rarely used, was buzzing with texts from industry gossips who had already heard the news. He ignored them all. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a searing, volcanic rage. Vivian. How dare she? How dare that quiet little mouse who used to cry when they watched sad movies storm into his world and burn it down? It wasn't natural. It wasn't right. He replayed the meeting in his head. Sterling Holloway Trust. He knew the name, of course. Old money. Railroad money. Dead money, most people thought. A sleepy family office that managed grandfathered trusts for useless heirs. And Vivian was the chairwoman? It didn't add up. When they dated, she lived paycheck to paycheck, working at the Queen's Public Library. She told him her parents died in a car crash when she was 10, and she grew up in foster care. She had no one. That vulnerability was part of why he had been attracted to her initially. She made him feel big, protective. She had lied. She must have. Lucas slammed his empty glass down on the coffee table, hard enough to threaten the glass surface. He wasn't going to just take this. He was Lucas Thornton. He fought dirty. He grabbed his laptop and logged into a secure, encrypted messaging app. He needed dirt. He needed leverage. If Vivian wanted to play war, he would bring a nuclear option. He typed a message to a contact, saved only as Trace. Need a deep dive immediately. Target, Vivian Sterling, aka Vivian Vance, current chair of Sterling Holloway Trust. 5 years ago, she was a nobody in Queens. Now she runs the world. Find out how. Find the bodies buried. Price is no object. Trace was Elias Thorne, a former forensic accountant for the FBI who got bored with the rules and now operated in the grey zones of corporate espionage. If information existed, Elias could find it. Lucas spent the next 3 hours pacing his apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below like indifferent diamonds. He imagined Vivian somewhere up in one of those penthouses, laughing at him. The thought made his stomach churn with acid. At 2:17 a.m. his laptop chimed. A secure file transfer from Trace. Lucas opened it. It was 80 pages of dense financial records, court documents, and genealogy charts. He skipped the preamble and went straight to Elias's executive summary. Lucas, you stepped in it this time. Your ex isn't a gold digger. She's a sleeper agent. Here's the reality. Vivian wasn't lying about foster care. Her mother was disowned by the Sterling family 40 years ago for running off with a mechanic, Vance. Vivian grew up knowing nothing about her mother's side of the family. 5 years ago, almost exactly a month after you dumped her, her maternal great-uncle died. Bartholomew Sterling, the black sheep of the Sterling clan, a miserable old bastard who hated his siblings and their spoiled children. He owned the controlling interest in the family trust. His will was a masterstroke of spite. He left everything, the trust, the real estate, the majority voting rights, to the only blood relative who had never asked him for a dime, his estranged niece's daughter. Vivian. Lucas stared at the screen. A month after he dumped her. If he had waited just 4 weeks. He forced himself to read on. The report got worse for him. But here's the kicker, Lucas. She didn't just inherit a pile of cash. When she got the trust, it was practically insolvent. The other family members had looted it through mismanagement and bad investments. It was drowning in debt and facing SEC investigations. Most people would have taken a payout and run. Your girl didn't. She walked into that nest of vipers, fired the entire board, mostly her own cousins, settled the lawsuits for pennies on the dollar, and restructured the entire portfolio. She didn't buy Obsidian Tech with inherited cash. She leveraged the rehabilitated trust assets to execute a hostile takeover that tripled its value in 18 months. She didn't marry rich. She didn't steal it. She outsmarted them. She's colder than you ever were. Good luck, buddy. You're going to need it. Lucas leaned back, the laptop burning his thighs. The room felt suffocatingly small. He had always told himself he left Vivian because she wasn't enough, because she was too simple, too soft for the world he wanted to conquer. The truth, glaring at him from the blue light of the screen, was devastating. She hadn't been too soft. She had just been sleeping, and by breaking her heart, he had woken her up. He had created the monster that just ate him alive. A dark, desperate idea began to form in Lucas's mind. Elias's report mentioned the other Sterling family members, the cousins she had fired and cut off from the family fortune. They would be angry. They would be desperate. They would hate Vivian just as much as he did right now. Lucas smiled, a grim, humorless stretching of his lips. Vivian thought she understood power because she had money, but Lucas knew something else about power. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. He wasn't out of the game yet. He was just switching teams. He picked up his phone and began searching for names from the report, the disenfranchised Sterling heirs. It was time to build an army. 3 days later, Lucas sat in a booth at the Knickerbocker Club. It was a place that reeked of cigar smoke and declining empires. It was the perfect hunting ground for the kind of men Lucas needed. Men who believed the world owed them everything while they did nothing to earn it. Across from him sat Reginald Sterling. Reginald was Vivian's second cousin. Before Vivian took over, he had been the presumptive heir to the Sterling throne. Now, according to the dossier Trace had sent, he was living off a stipend that Vivian had capped at $80,000 a year, a poverty wage in Reginald's mind. So, Reginald grunted, swirling a brandy that looked too expensive for him to be buying. You're the ex, the one who broke little orphan Annie's heart. I'm the man who knows her weaknesses, Lucas corrected, leaning in. And I know she's vulnerable right now, Reginald scoffed. Vulnerable? She just bought half the tech sector. She's untouchable. She has the board in her pocket. She has the board because she makes them money, Lucas said, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. But she made a mistake on Tuesday night. A massive legal error. Reginald's watery blue eyes narrowed. What kind of error? Breach of fiduciary duty, Lucas said, savoring the legal term. I had a deal on the table. A deal that would have netted the Sterling Holloway Trust a 20% return on their debt immediately. It was a slam dunk. The board would have loved it. Lucas paused for effect. Vivian killed the deal. She didn't kill it because the numbers were bad. She killed it because I was presenting it. She admitted it in front of 12 witnesses. She put her personal vendetta against an ex-boyfriend above the financial interests of the trust. Reginald sat up straighter. She admitted it. She said, I'm calling the loan because the management is ethically compromised. That's code for, I hate my ex. If we can prove she acted out of spite, we can sue her for mismanagement. We can force a vote of no confidence. You can get your seat back, Reginald. Reginald licked his lips. Greed was a powerful motivator, but revenge was better. Vivian had humiliated him, cut his allowance, and forced him to fly commercial. I can get the signatures, Reginald whispered. My sister Beatrice, cousin Julian, they all hate her. She makes them submit receipts for their expenses, for God's sake. If you can prove she tanked a profitable deal for personal reasons, we can bury her. I can prove it, Lucas lied. He couldn't prove it yet, but he was a master of spinning narratives. I just need a platform. Call an emergency shareholder meeting. Cite concern over erratic leadership. Get me in the room. Reginald smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. Monday morning, the quarterly review. Be there, Mr. Thornton, and bring your axe. Lucas walked out of the club, feeling a rush of adrenaline he hadn't felt since his early trading days. He was going to destroy her. He wasn't just going to get his job back, he was going to take her crown. He spent the weekend rehearsing his speech. He would paint Vivian as an emotional, unstable woman who couldn't separate her diary from her ledger. It was a sexist angle, sure, but he knew the Sterling family. They were old-fashioned misogynists. They were to eat it up. The boardroom of the Sterling Holloway Trust was different from the one at the hotel. This was old New York power. Dark oak paneling, portraits of stern men with mutton chops lining the walls, and a view of Central Park that cost more than the GDP of a small island nation. When Lucas walked in on Monday morning, flanked by Reginald and Beatrice Sterling, the atmosphere was electric. Vivian was already seated at the head of the table. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Good, Lucas thought. She's rattling. Reginald, Vivian said, not looking up from her tablet. I didn't realize you were coming today, or that you were bringing guests who have been banned from the premises. I am a shareholder, Vivian, Reginald blustered, puffing out his chest, and I have the right to be heard. We are formally motioning for a review of your competency as chairwoman. The other board members, mostly impartial professionals Vivian had hired, looked uncomfortable. On what grounds? Vivian asked, finally looking up. Her gaze landed on Lucas, and for a second she looked genuinely sad. Not scared. Sad. On the grounds of gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty, Lucas announced, stepping forward. He projected his voice, using his best courtroom baritone. Last week you torpedoed a merger with Harrington and Moore, a merger that would have enriched this trust. You did it to settle a 5-year-old romantic score with me. He slammed a stack of papers on the table. This is an affidavit from Arthur Pendleton, stating that the deal was sound until you saw me in the room. You used the trust's assets as a weapon in a lover's quarrel. That is illegal, Madam Chairwoman, and these shareholders demand your resignation. The room erupted in murmurs. Reginald looked triumphant. Beatrice was smirking. Vivian let the noise wash over her. She waited until the room fell silent again. She didn't yell. She didn't panic. She just reached for a remote control on the table. I was wondering if you would try this, Lucas, she said softly. I hoped you wouldn't. I hoped you would just walk away and start over. But you never could leave well enough alone. Don't change the subject, Lucas snapped. Did you or did you not fire me because of our past? I fired you, Vivian said, her voice turning steel hard, because if I hadn't, you would be in federal prison by noon today. Lucas froze. What? Vivian pressed a button. The large screen behind her flickered to life. It wasn't a graph or a spreadsheet. It was a video recording. Grainy black and white footage from a security camera. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. It showed Lucas in a dimly lit bar, handing a thick envelope to a man. Lucas's blood turned to ice. He recognized the man. It was a junior analyst from Obsidian Tech, the company he was trying to acquire. 3 weeks ago, Vivian narrated coolly, you bribed an employee of Obsidian Tech to leak confidential R&D test results. You wanted to suppress their stock price so Harrington and Moore could buy them cheaper. That is corporate espionage and insider trading, Lucas. The room was deadly silent. Reginald's smirk vanished. I didn't kill the deal because I hate you, Lucas, Vivian continued. I killed the deal because I was conducting due diligence on the buyer. My investigators found this footage 2 days before the gala. I knew Harrington and Moore was built on fraud. If I had let the deal go through, the SEC would have frozen my assets when you eventually got caught. She stood up, looking 10 feet tall. I fired you publicly to distance my bank from your crime. I didn't call the police because, well, call me sentimental. I thought losing your job was punishment enough for the boy I used to love." She looked at Reginald, whose face had gone pale. "But now you walk into my boardroom with my idiot cousin and accuse me of misconduct?" Vivian picked up her phone. "I gave you a life raft, Lucas. You just poked a hole in it." She tapped the screen. "I just sent the file to the district attorney. The police are waiting in the lobby." Lucas stumbled back, hitting the wall. The air had left the room. It wasn't spite. It wasn't revenge. It was mercy. She had been protecting him, even while she fired him. She had given him a chance to leave quietly, to go find another job in a smaller pond, and he had come back to try and kill her. The doors to the boardroom opened. This time it wasn't hotel security. It was 2 officers from the NYPD, followed by a man in a windbreaker that said FBI. "Lucas Thornton?" the agent asked. Lucas looked at Vivian. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was looking down at her papers, already moving on to the next item on the agenda. "Vivian, please," he croaked. "Vivian, I didn't know you knew. Goodbye, Lucas," she said, without looking up. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Lucas realized the true extent of his failure. He hadn't just underestimated her power. He had underestimated her character. He thought everyone was as dirty as he was. He was wrong, and that mistake cost him everything. Time didn't pass in the Federal Correctional Institution at Otisville. It eroded. It wore you down, grain by grain, until the person you used to be was nothing more than dust on the concrete floor. 3 years. That was how long it had been since the gavel slammed down, sealing the fate of Lucas Thornton. To the outside world, Otisville was club-fed. It was where the white-collar criminals went, the tax evaders, the insider traders, the disgraced politicians. The public imagined tennis courts and lobster dinners, but the reality was a monochromatic nightmare of boredom and lost agency. There were no tennis courts. There was only the recreation yard, a fenced-in slab of cracked pavement, where men who used to move markets now walked in aimless circles, measuring their lives in laps. Lucas sat on a rusted weight bench near the perimeter fence, the cold November wind biting through his thin, khaki-colored issue jacket. He looked older than 37. The sharp, predatory angles of his face had softened. Not from kindness, but from a diet of starch and cheap fillers. His hair, once his crowning glory, styled with $50 clay and precise cuts, was now buzzed short to military regulation. It was graying at the temples. He wasn't the Wolf of Wall Street anymore. He wasn't the youngest senior vice president in the history of Harrington and Moore. In here, titles didn't exist. He was inmate 7449221B. He was a number in a spreadsheet, a rounding error in the federal budget. "You're brooding again, Thornton. It's bad for the digestion." Lucas didn't look up. He knew the voice. It belonged to Miller, a 50-year-old former hedge fund manager who was serving 8 years for a Ponzi scheme that wiped out a teacher's pension fund. Miller still walked with a swagger that looked ridiculous in prison sweats, desperate to cling to the ghost of his former importance. "Go away, Miller," Lucas muttered, staring at the toes of his cheap canvas sneakers. Miller sat down anyway, groaning as his joints popped. "Market's rallying today. I can feel it. If I was out there, I'd be shorting natural gas. The weather patterns in the Midwest are shifting. Easy money." "You're not out there," Lucas said, his voice flat. "And neither am I. There is no money. There's just the count at 4 p.m. Miller scoffed. "You gave up too easy, kid. That's your problem. You took the plea, you took the fall, and now you just sit here. You got to keep the mind sharp. Plot the comeback. Everyone loves a comeback story." Lucas finally turned to look at him. His eyes were hollow, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined them. "There is no comeback, Miller. You don't get it. We didn't just lose the game. We were kicked out of the stadium." He thought about the day of his sentencing. He had scanned the back of the courtroom, his heart hammering against his ribs, looking for her. He had expected, no, he had hoped to see Vivian there. He wanted to see anger in her eyes. He wanted to see a smirk. He wanted to see something that proved he still mattered to her, even if it was as an enemy. But the bench had been empty. She hadn't come. She hadn't sent a lawyer. She hadn't even submitted a victim impact statement. The realization had hit him harder than the judge's sentence. To Vivian Sterling, Lucas Thornton wasn't a villain to be vanquished. He was simply a bad investment she had written off. He was a sunk cost, forgotten the moment the ledger was balanced. "Suit yourself," Miller grunted, pulling a folded, crumpled newspaper from inside his jacket. "Guard left this in the break room. Wall Street Journal. A week old, but news is news." Miller tossed the paper onto the bench between them. The wind caught the edges, fluttering the pages like the wings of a dying bird. "I don't want it," Lucas said. "Suit yourself. I'm going to walk. Got to keep the ticker strong for the second act." Miller stood up and began his trudge around the yard, muttering to himself about commodity futures. Lucas stared at the paper. He told himself not to touch it. He told himself that looking at the world he had lost would only bring pain. But the addiction was too strong. The ink, the font, the layout, it was the language he had spoken his entire adult life. His hand trembled slightly as he reached out and picked it up. He bypassed the market data. He didn't care about the S&P 500 anymore. He turned to the business and philanthropy section, looking for the human stories, the gossip, the falls from grace that might make his own situation feel less pathetic. And then the air left his lungs. It wasn't a small blurb. It was a half-page feature, dominated by a color photograph. The photo showed a construction site in Queens. It was a gritty, familiar street corner, the kind of place Lucas had fought claw and tooth to escape. In the center of the frame, wearing a white, hard hat and holding a ceremonial golden shovel, was Vivian. She looked breathtaking. Not in the way Isabel Vanderbilt had looked, with her plastic, manufactured perfection. Vivian looked real. She looked solid. She was wearing a tailored navy coat, her chestnut hair blowing in the wind, her smile radiant and genuine. Lucas read the headline, his finger tracing the bold black letters. Sterling Holloway Trust pledges $50 million to revitalize Queen's library system. Lucas felt a phantom ache in his chest. He read the article, devouring every word. The initiative, spearheaded by Chairwoman Vivian Sterling, aims to modernize 20 branches in underserved communities. The flagship location, built on the site of a former derelict warehouse, will include a technology center, a career counseling hub, and a dedicated literacy program for at-risk youth. "I believe in quiet potential," Ms. Sterling said in her keynote address. "I was a librarian in this borough for many years. I saw brilliance every day that was stifled by a lack of resources. We often look at people and judge them by the volume of their voice or the cut of their suit. We forget that the most powerful stories are often the ones written in silence. I am investing in the people the world has overlooked." Lucas lowered the paper, his hands shaking. The irony was heavy enough to crush him. Queens. She was rebuilding the very world he had mocked her for. He remembered the night he'd dumped her. He remembered looking around their small apartment, with its mismatched furniture and the smell of her cooking, and feeling suffocated. "You're comfortable," he had sneered. "I need someone who understands power." He looked at the photo again. The mayor of New York was standing next to her, looking at her with deference. The CEO of a major construction firm was on her other side, laughing at something she had said. She hadn't just understood power, she had redefined it. She hadn't needed to leave Queens to find greatness. She had brought the greatness to Queens. She was using the billions she made from the sharks on Wall Street, men like Lucas, to fund the dreams of people like the girl she used to be. It was the ultimate victory. It wasn't revenge, it was transcendence. She looks happy. Lucas jumped. Miller had circled back around. He was looking over Lucas's shoulder at the paper. She looks rich, Miller corrected, squinting at the photo. That coat is cashmere, Loro Piana, probably $5,000. Who is she? She's... Lucas's voice caught in his throat. She's someone I used to know. Wait, Miller said, leaning closer, tapping a smaller photo at the bottom of the page. Isn't that the same woman? In the social diary corner? Lucas hadn't seen the bottom of the page. He shifted his gaze down. There was a second photo, smaller, intimate. It wasn't a press shot. It was a candid from a wedding. Vivian was wearing a simple, elegant white dress. She wasn't holding a shovel or a balance sheet. She was holding a glass of champagne, her head thrown back in laughter, her hand resting on the arm of a man. Lucas stared at the man. He wasn't a titan of industry. He wasn't a politician. He was wearing a tweed jacket with elbow patches, his hair messy, his glasses slightly askew. He looked kind. He looked soft. The caption read, Vivian Sterling celebrates her marriage to Dr. Elias Thorne, professor of comparative literature at Columbia University, in a private ceremony in the Catskills. A literature professor. The breath hissed out of Lucas's teeth. A teacher? Miller laughed, a harsh, barking sound. She has billions of dollars. She runs the biggest private trust in the city, and she marries a teacher? What a waste. No, Lucas whispered. No, it's not. Guy probably makes $60,000 a year, Miller sneered. She could have had anyone. She could have had a senator, a CEO. Why would she settle for a guy who reads books all day? Because she doesn't need a wallet, Lucas said, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. She needs a partner. He stared at the way the man, Dr. Thorne, looked at Vivian in the photo. He wasn't looking at her like she was a trophy. He wasn't looking at her like she was a stepping stone to a promotion. He was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. He looked at her the way Lucas used to, before the greed ate him alive. Lucas realized then, with a clarity that cut through the fog of his narcissism, that he had been wrong about everything. He had left Vivian because he thought she was small. He thought she held him back. He thought he needed a shark like Isabel to survive in the deep end. But Vivian hadn't wanted a shark. She hadn't wanted a master of the universe. She had wanted someone to read books with. She had wanted someone to share a quiet life with. She had the money now. She had the power. But she hadn't let it change her heart. She had married the man Lucas should have been. She had married the life she always wanted, and she had the power to protect it. Lucas was the one who had changed. He had twisted himself into a monster to fit a world that didn't care about him, and in the process, he had thrown away the only thing that was real. You okay, Thornton? You look like you're going to be sick, Miller asked, stepping back. I'm fine, Lucas lied. He stood up, his legs feeling heavy. I'm done with the paper. You can have it. You sure? You didn't even check the bond yields. I don't care about the bonds, Lucas said. He turned and walked toward the chain-link fence. He gripped the cold metal with his fingers, looking out at the barren tree line that marked the edge of the prison grounds. He thought about writing to her. He imagined crafting a letter, explaining that he understood now, that he was sorry, that he was proud of her. But he stopped the thought before it could fully form. Writing to her would be an act of ego. It would be an attempt to insert himself back into her narrative. It would be noise. Vivian Sterling had built an empire on the power of silence. She had won because she knew when to speak and when to wait. She had moved on. She was happy. She was building libraries and loving a man who probably brought her tea in bed. The greatest apology Lucas could give her was his continued silence. To remain a ghost. To let her believe he had simply ceased to exist. A gust of wind swept across the yard. It caught the newspaper from the bench where Miller had left it. The pages tumbled across the grey concrete, tumbling over and over, past the weight bench, past the inmates walking in circles, past Lucas. He watched as the page with Vivian's smiling face blew up against the fence, pinned there for a moment by the force of the wind, looking out at the free world beyond. Then the wind shifted, and the paper slipped through a gap in the chain link, dancing away into the tall grass of the forest, disappearing from sight. Lucas Thornton stood alone in the cold, gripping the fence, finally understanding that while he was the one behind bars, he had been a prisoner of his own ambition long before the handcuffs ever went on. He let go of the fence, turned his back on the world he could no longer reach, and walked back toward his cell. And that is how the wolf ended up in a cage, while the sheep didn't just inherit the earth, she rebuilt it. Lucas spent his life chasing the noise of success, never realizing that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one listening the hardest. He mistook Vivian's kindness for weakness, and her silence for submission. By the time he heard her roar, his life was already over. It's a brutal, necessary reminder for all of us. True power isn't about how loud you can shout or how much you can take. It's about who you are when the cameras aren't rolling. Vivian proved that you can conquer the world without losing your soul, while Lucas proved that you can gain the whole world and lose everything that matters.